Good afternoon, my name is Julia Billig. I'm not an art historian, but I have spent many years studying European history and art. During my travels, I write travel notes, and each of my journeys is thematic. I immerse myself in a particular era or artistic school. What if I told you that 700 years ago, in a small Italian town, they were creating the first Netflix series, that artists were fined for witchcraft, and that accounting ledger covers were painted like works of art? Today I want to tell you about an exhibition that was worth flying to London for, the Sienese School of Painting at the National Gallery, unique works from 1300 to 1350. I fell in love with Siena at first sight in July 2023, but with Sienese art much earlier. I waited a year for this exhibition, and you know what? It exceeded all expectations.
So prepare for a fascinating journey. You'll discover secrets of the Sienese school's formation, how one saint changed all art, Guido da Siena, the pioneer who laid the foundations, Duccio di Buoninsegna, the rebel artist, the medieval Caravaggio, Duccio's MAESTÀ, the greatest altarpiece that was sawed in half. And in the next two videos will be his brilliant students, Simone Martini, the Lorenzetti brothers, and others. Let's begin. But first, a brief overview of how it all began, if you haven't heard the first lecture in this series. It all began with Francis of Assisi. We see on screen the oldest image of Francis, probably created during his lifetime in the monastery of Saint Benedict in Subiaco. Francis achieved the impossible. He radically changed the medieval perception of the world. Imagine, for the first time in a millennium, someone said that the material world is beautiful, that one can speak with God personally, bypassing church hierarchy. This was a revolution of consciousness that exploded art from within. The Franciscan movement became a catalyst for artistic revolution, transforming art from a symbolic system into a means of emotional and psychological impact, and this was the foundation of all Renaissance aesthetics. This is simply shocking. Both images are from the 14th century, but they are completely different universes. Left, Giotto di Bondone. Frescoes in Assisi, living people, real emotions, recognizable faces. This is almost medieval selfies. Right, Byzantine icon from Novgorod. Flatness, gold, symbols. This is like a technical manual for holiness. Byzantium created comics with technical specifications, while Franciscanism turned art into a reality show. And here Siena enters the arena of Italian artistic life. Siena of the 13th to 14th centuries was an amazing phenomenon of medieval civilization, a city that managed to create a unique cultural model and challenge Florence itself. Siena was one of the main economic, political, and cultural centers of Tuscany in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, experiencing its golden age between 1287 and 1355, when the independent commune was ruled by 9 magistrates, known as Signori Nove, or the Government of 9. This was a revolutionary experiment. Power belonged to the middle classes, merchants and artisans, not the aristocracy. This system ensured unprecedented stability and prosperity.
Now on screen is the Piazza del Campo. This is the main square of the city, which looks as if specially designed for public gatherings, and indeed it is. It resembles an ancient theater with its gradual descent toward the Palazzo Pubblico, but every Sienese will explain to you that it's actually the Madonna's cloak covering the city. In the center, you see a beautiful example of civic architecture, the Palazzo Pubblico building, where the government of 9 met and city problems were resolved. Inside, it's painted with frescoes by the best masters from the Proto-Renaissance to the Mannerist era, like a precious jewelry box. And although Florence is often positioned as the center of the Renaissance, Siena played no less significant role in the development of art during this period. Siena's flourishing fell between the victory at Montaperti in 1260 over the Florentines and the plague epidemic in 1348. In these nearly 100 years, the city became one of the richest and most influential in Europe. The foundation of Siena's prosperity was banking. Sienese bankers, Piccolomini, Tolomei, Salimbeni, lent money to the kings of England and France. The Buonsignori Bank was the largest in Europe until the collapse of Bardi and Peruzzi. This is analogous to today's J.P. Morgan or Goldman Sachs. Siena controlled trade routes between northern Italy and Rome, receiving enormous income from pilgrims and merchants. The secret of Siena's success? Money, politics, and art. Siena considered itself the city of the Madonna. Before the Battle of Montaperti, the Sienese symbolically handed over the city keys to the Virgin Mary del Voto. Actually, the term Madonna del Voto can refer to any image of the Virgin Mary to which a vow, votum, is made. But in this case, it was an image created by Dieti Salvi di Speme in 1260 to 1267. There's some chronological inconsistency here, as you may notice. Most likely, in 1260, the keys were handed over before an older Byzantine icon, and Dieti Salvi di Speme created a new version of the same miraculous Madonna after the victory between 1260 to 1267. This cult of the Madonna permeated everything, from politics to every artistic commission. Siena became a center of religious mysticism. Saint Catherine of Siena, 1347 to 1380, was one of the most influential women of her time, convincing the Pope to return from Avignon to Rome. Can you imagine this woman's influence? Sienese mystics created a special spiritual tradition combining asceticism with active social work. Founded in 1240, the University of Siena became one of Europe's leading institutions, a kind of medieval Harvard, especially in law. Students came here from across the continent. The plague of 1348 took 2/3 of the population. It decreased from 80,000 to 25,000 people. The city never fully recovered. Political turmoil, economic crisis, and finally conquest by Florence in 1555 turned the once mighty republic into a provincial town. Paradoxically, it was decline that preserved medieval Siena. The city seemed to freeze in the 14th century, becoming a living museum of one of the brightest epochs in Italian history. The Sienese school of painting anticipated many Renaissance discoveries, and the Republic's political experiments influenced the development of democratic ideas. And now, the main confrontation of the era. To briefly describe the difference between Sienese and Florentine schools of painting, Florence asked, how? How is the world constructed? How to convey volume? How to depict movement? Florence was humanistic philosophy. Siena asked, why? Why beauty? To reach the divine through it and touch the soul. Siena was religious elevation. Florence created the science of painting. Siena, the poetry of painting. In Sienese painting, 3 traditions dance: Byzantine iconography, Gothic miniature, and Renaissance innovation. And this dance is mesmerizing. Now, after the historical overview, let's move directly to the Sienese artistic school. Its pioneer is considered Guido da Siena. His famous Maestà from the Palazzo Pubblico, circa 1260, became the first great work that laid the foundations of Sienese tradition. Guido da Siena actively used the image of Madonna and Child enthroned. He created his Maestà, combining 2 Byzantine iconographic images, Praise of the Mother of God and Hodegetria, the Guide. From praise, he took additional characters to the right and left of the Madonna's head, and from Hodegetria, the gesture. The Maestà is very large, approximately 3 by 2 meters. Previously, it was in the church of San Domenico, and now it's in the Siena Pinacoteca. Regarding the authorship of the Maestà, there's no consensus. Here begins a detective story. The painting bears a date, 1221, but the faces themselves were painted in the second half of the 13th century. Some believe all original faces were repainted, while others think the entire work is a copy of the first example, copying the date as well. Who's right? The mystery remains unsolved, but what's indisputable? Guido already shows soft modeling, emotional gestures, exquisite color, harbingers of the future. Guido da Siena was an important transitional figure, but Renaissance traditions in Siena begin with Duccio di Buoninsegna, approximately 1255 to 1319. And there were many of his works at the exhibition. I didn't even expect it. A bit about him. He was an extraordinary personality. He was born in Siena to a middle-class family. Little is known about him. His birth date is assumed to be around 1255 to 1260. The Buoninsegna family apparently belonged to the artisan class. He presumably studied under local masters working in the Byzantine tradition, perhaps under Cimabue, but there's no documentary confirmation. The first documentary mention of Duccio dates to 1278, when he received a commission to paint Tavolet. These are wooden covers for expense books of the Sienese Republic's treasury. You see on screen 2 such covers, and it's assumed the left one was by Duccio. Imagine, it's as if Banksy made you a cover for an annual report today. No, Siena is a completely unique city with inhabitants who breathe art. Archival documents paint Duccio as an independent and explosive personality. He was repeatedly fined for various violations of city rules. In 1279, he was fined for refusing to swear allegiance to the captain of the people, showing his opposition to authorities. In 1302, he was caught practicing witchcraft. It's also known he was married and had 7 children. Despite his debts and all the fines he had to pay, in 1304, Duccio apparently owned a vineyard in the Castagneto area near Siena, indicating considerable wealth at the time. But after Duccio's death, his family renounced the inheritance due to debts. He had 7 children, 2 of whom became artists. A familiar story of a genius artist? I suppose his next incarnation was Caravaggio. This is of course a joke, but the parallel really exists. Both were rebel artists who compensated life's troubles with genius. They stood at turning points in art history. Duccio between Byzantine Middle Ages and Gothic, Caravaggio between Mannerism and Baroque. There were also key differences between them. Duccio worked within church and municipal commissions. His rebellion was more personal. Caravaggio challenged the entire artistic system of his era. Duccio evolutionarily developed Byzantine tradition, making it more human. Caravaggio revolutionarily destroyed Renaissance idealization, but both revolutionized religious painting, making it more human and emotional, though through different means and in different eras. Perhaps it was internal conflict and life's passions that helped them create such powerful, emotionally charged works. Both created entire schools. Duccio's Sienese school with great artists like Simon Martini, the Lorenzetti brothers, etc. Caravaggisti were throughout Europe, as we remember. Artemisia and Orazio Gentileschi, Bartolomeo Manfredi, Honthorst, etc. Duccio achieved the impossible. He united Byzantine tradition with Gothic refinement and Renaissance innovation. Due to gaps when Duccio's name isn't mentioned in Sienese records for years, scholars suggest he might have traveled to Paris, Assisi, and Rome. But there's no confirmation. Most likely, he never went to France. His Gothic style resulted from cultural exchange through imported works, French ivory objects, illuminated manuscripts. A lesson for our time. A great artist can absorb world influences while staying home. Relevant in the internet age, right? Duccio's style features impeccable clarity, possibly started with miniatures, Richest coloring, reds, blues, golden tones, subtle facial modeling, masterful use of gold. Unlike his contemporary Giotto, Duccio was less interested in drama and naturalism, preferring refinement and spirituality. His figures are more fragile and elegant than the monumental images of Florentines. The exhibition began with the Stroganov Madonna, which got its name from Russian collector Count Grigory Stroganov. He owned the painting in the 19th century. In Soviet times, it was sold to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. An extraordinarily tender Madonna. Here, Duccio's evolution from Byzantine canons to more human representation is very clear. Golden halos and ceremonial frontality remain, but psychological connection between Madonna and child is already visible. This is one of the first images where the Mother of God is shown primarily as a mother, not as Queen of Heaven. Mary and Christ look at each other, creating dialogue. There's no formal ceremony. Mary tenderly embraces Christ, and he plays with her maphorion. We see softer, painterly volume rendering of faces, exquisite combination of blue maphorion and Christ's red tunic, characteristic of the Sienese school. The blue color of the maphorion is simply amazingly deep. And another detail, in Byzantium, Mary almost always wears a cap under her maphorion. While in Catholic Madonna images, there's usually a veil and generally great variety in headdresses. As far as I remember, only in Byzantine mosaics of Ravenna is Mary sometimes without a cap. And this is his triptych with the Virgin Mary and Child surrounded by Saint Dominic, Saint Aurea of Ostia, and 7 prophets, approximately 1315. Saint Dominic, founder of the Dominican order Hounds of the Lord, and Saint Aurea, patroness of Ostia. The triptych wings open to reveal a wondrous vision. Madonna with gentle blush on her cheeks, tender and royal simultaneously. She gently rocks her son, holding him in the crook of her arm, while he plays with her veil. Above are 7 prophets, Daniel, Moses, Isaiah, David in center, Abraham, Jacob, and Jeremiah, with scrolls predicting Christ's birth. Amazing combination of Byzantine golden background with painting in very delicate balance, making this one of Duccio's best works. The patron was most likely Cardinal Niccolo degli Albertini da Prato, who became Cardinal Bishop of Ostia in 1303. This is a portable folding altar for private prayer during travels. Side panels fold inward, protecting the central panel. X-rays show that once a leather strap held the triptych closed, and the cardinal's coat of arms was on the back of side panels. Imagine, like a medieval iPad for prayers. X-rays revealed Duccio made preparatory drawings with a quill pen, like modern sketches. Triptych with Crucifixion, St. Nicholas, St. Clement, or St. Gregory the Great, and the Redeemer with angels, most likely commissioned by the same Cardinal da Prato. Here's a real detective story. Well, we all know about St. Nicholas in the red cloak on the left panel. He's the prototype of Father Frost and Santa Claus. But the right panel is a puzzle. If it's St. Clement, where's the anchor tied to his neck? But maybe the right panel shows St. Gregory the Great. He's in papal vestments with white wool bands with black crosses on his shoulders and a crown on his head. St. Gregory the Great was especially venerated by Dominicans. So we get Nicholas, personal patron, protection in travels. Gregory, spiritual mentor, wisdom in service. Certainly the Crucifixion, center of Christian faith. Anyway, who's on the right? Choose for yourself. In art, sometimes mysteries are more interesting than answers. And here's the exhibition sensation. These 2 triptychs are reunited for the first time in several centuries. Look, structure and dimensions are identical. Decoration on wings is similar. Together they tell of Christ's divinity and humanity. Cardinal Niccolo used them in Avignon as means of worship and objects of aesthetic enjoyment. Even then they understood Art heals the soul. Duccio was famous for his mastery of crowd scenes and ability to create convincing emotional relationships between figures. Look at this drama. Duccio masterfully creates contrasts. Left side, grief, unity, feminine tenderness. Right side, aggression, chaos, masculine cruelty. Center, Christ's divine calm. Right, see the Roman soldier in red? He just said, "Truly this was the Son of God." The moment of revelation caught forever. Instead of Byzantine statues, living people with real emotions. This is Duccio's revolution. He demonstrates here a brilliant synthesis of Byzantine solemnity with Gothic humanity, the Sienese school's calling card. To better appreciate Duccio's genius, we should look at his contemporaries. After all, what has come down to us is selection made by the strictest judge, time. Here we see Madonna and Child, with Annunciation, Crucifixion, and Last Judgment scenes. Master of St. Clare. This is a conventional name given by art historians to an anonymous 13th century Italian artist. This master is connected with Assisi, where his famous work, a panel depicting St. Clare, is in the Basilica of St. Clare. The master of St. Clare, like many Sienese artists, knew Byzantine icons well. This panel shows the iconographic type called Merciful Mother of God, Eliusa, where mother and son touch cheeks. They're surrounded by scenes summarizing Christian salvation history. Madonna and Child are as if in the midst of the Annunciation. To the left of her head, St. Gabriel with the message. To the right, the Virgin Mary herself. Above Madonna and Christ's head, the Crucifixion scene. And higher still, the Last Judgment. Narrative painting would become a key characteristic of Sienese art. Also notice the decoration of each gilded surface. Here gold is decorated with incisions, pressed patterns, and dotted lines. The image seems to move before our eyes. This is hard to see in photographs, but when you next see this technique in a museum, pay attention. Why does the image move? Different relief depths reflect light differently. Changing viewing angle changes light play. Micro relief creates constantly changing highlights. Plus, contrast between polished and textured gold. The symbolic meaning of this technique: golden background represents divine light. Patterns, heavenly beauty. Light movement, divine presence. This technique required incredible skill and patience. One halo could take several days to decorate. Simone Martini was especially virtuosic in this technique, but more on him later. And this is Duccio again. Virgin and Child enthroned with angels. The original owner of this tiny Duccio painting most likely used it for concentration in personal meditation and prayers. Here's still Byzantine influence, but already new tendencies. Volume, space, emotional connection. Christ tightly embraces Mary's neck, strokes her fingers. Details are mesmerizing. Cushions sagging under Madonna's weight. Curtain, living fabric folds. Look, you feel living flesh under the fabric. Triptych with Crucifixion and other scenes. The triptych with Crucifixion and other scenes is Duccio's earliest surviving triptych and his first work in a British collection. The triptych is borrowed from French ivory objects that traveled along the Via Francigena pilgrimage route. Central panel, Christ's crucifixion at Golgotha with the grieving Virgin Mary and St. John. The name Golgotha itself translates from Aramaic as place of the skull. This can indicate both the hill shape and the legend of Adam's burial at this place. Christ's blood dripping on Adam's skull symbolizes redemption of original sin and humanity's salvation. Left panel, Annunciation in upper part, Virgin and Child with 4 angels below. Right panel, St. Francis receiving stigmata above, Christ and Virgin enthroned with 6 angels below. The scenes are intended for sequential reading, beginning with the Annunciation and Virgin and Child enthroned to the left of the central crucifixion. In Duccio's triptych, The skull at the cross's foot intensifies the scene's drama and emphasizes the central theme of Christian salvation. In the image of Madonna and Child enthroned with angels on both sides, there's the broken, harsh assist characteristic of Byzantium. Assist is strokes of gold leaf on fabric folds, angel wings, etc. But what exquisite color combinations! What soft transitions instead of sharp contrasts! Psychology and emotionality, figure volume and narrative quality. And notice the amazingly beautiful thrones left and right, the curtain on the right panel. Duccio's throne becomes an architectural element, almost like living architecture. There's a suggestion that Duccio began his career as a miniaturist, hence his heightened interest in details and impeccable execution. Infrared reflectography revealed fine preparatory drawing in Duccio's paintings, a technique characteristic of miniaturists. This explains his unique ability to combine monumentality with intimate detail, a skill that could only come from years of manuscript work. I think this triptych was probably commissioned for a Franciscan patron. Otherwise, why would St. Francis receiving stigmata be at the top of the right panel?
Let's digress a bit from Duccio. Master of Città di Castello, Crucifixion. The image was made around 1315 to 1320. This anonymous artist was one of Duccio's most talented followers. Città di Castello is a place in Umbria, not his name. In this crucifixion, he repeats Duccio's interpretation from the Maestà, with some variations. Some reflect his detailed study of the pulpit in Siena Cathedral, decorated with scenes from Christ's life by Nicola Pisano. Others seem to be his own invention. The image of Christ's crucifixion shows the moment of death. His head tilted to one side, expression of pain on his face, blood flows from hands, head, from the wound in his side, and drips down the cross from his feet. A choir of 6 angels fills the surrounding air, expressing grief through gestures and facial expressions.
Crucified figures, a crowd reacting to news of his death. Left of Christ, friends and followers. The left position is the traditional place for converted to Christianity in crucifixion compositions. Right of Christ is the Virgin Mary in dark blue cloak. She faints and is supported by Salome and Mary of Cleophas. In red cloak, the most striking figure with hands raised to Christ. Mary Magdalene stretching her hands to him. The master of Città di Castello's work is by an artist with strong personality and remarkable color sensitivity, therefore easily identifiable among the multitude of followers inspired by Duccio. His stylistic features, particularly figures distinguished by pronounced volumetric effect, executed with marked chiaroscuro modeling and soft brushwork, are clearly recognizable and suggest the artist not only trained in Duccio's circle, but must have contacted other great masters. This is a mature work demonstrating synthesis of Sienese traditions with innovative elements characteristic of the transitional period from late medieval to early Renaissance. Here's a very interesting thing presented at this exhibition. A guest from France, Master Honoré. Justice and Crime, leaf from Laurent d'Orléans. This is a moral treatise written by Dominican monk Laurent d'Orléans, confessor to King Philip III of France and tutor to his children. The artist of these illustrations, a Frenchman known as Master Honoré, is recognized today as one of the greatest medieval book illuminators. Little is known about his life, but he apparently enjoyed a successful career at the turn of the 13th century. He's listed in Paris registers for 1292 as paying significantly more taxes than fellow illuminators. Clearly a successful master. The miniature contrasts the virtue of justice, honesty, with the vice of crime. Holding an image of a lamb and a plumb line, the personification of justice triumphantly stands over a snarling wolf. She demonstrates early connections between French court art and Sienese painting. Her elegant pose and drapery recall the standing holy women in Duccio's Maestà. Justice contrasts with Cain killing his brother Abel, representing crime. Below, Moses intervenes in a fight, and to the left, virtue hints more indirectly with Noah's Ark at the righteous arrangement of virtuous life. Noah's Ark is shown in cross-section. Both people and animals coexist peacefully. This miniature represents an outstanding example of Gothic book illustration art, demonstrating the highest level of the late 13th century Parisian school and mastery of one of the greatest artists of his time. And again, Duccio. Annunciation. Look at the magic of details. Mary wraps herself in a cloak listening to Gabriel. Golden stripes on the red dress make the belly seem to shimmer. This is the miracle of conception. A dove descends to her from the heavenly sphere. Architectural details tell the story. Pointed arches where the divine enters, angel, dove, door. Gothic arches, so new era, New Testament. Gabriel is still entering, emphasized by the leg and wing still in the arch, heel raised, leaning forward. The moment caught in movement. Gabriel's entrance through the arch is not only the beginning of the Annunciation story, but the beginning of the Maestà's epic narrative of Christ's life. The gray portico with foliate capitals frames Mary, separating her purity from the world. Nativity with prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel. Real cinema. Mary reclines after giving birth. On the sides, prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel with prophecies of the Immaculate Conception. Here we see Christ in the manger and simultaneously being bathed by midwives, the next frame, and shepherds receiving news of the Savior's birth, another frame. And what about Joseph? Left, Joseph sits separately, chin-propped, contemplating what Jacob calls Joseph's problem, the staggering responsibility of caring for and protecting God as a human child. Usually he's shown listening to the tempter who tries to seduce Joseph into not accepting Jesus' miraculous birth. The Protevangelium tells us that after Jesus' birth he went out of the cave struggling with doubts. Who wouldn't doubt in such a situation? Very human. Right, shepherds receive the news. Notice their lively poses. How wonderfully the dog and sheep are drawn on the right. How recognizable the midwives in their daily work. The font in which Christ is bathed looks like a communion chalice. This is symbolism, but in realistic domestic setting. Of course, religious context remains dominant, but Duccio introduces domestic elements into the religious scene not as symbols, but as living details of everyday life. And these are already harbingers of genre painting. Now I want to tell you about Duccio's greatest work. It wasn't at the exhibition, but I simply can't avoid talking about it with you, especially since a small part of it was there, and I'll discuss it later. In 1308, Siena commissioned Duccio to create a work that should surpass everything in the Christian world. For the work, he received an astronomical sum, 3,000 gold florins. What Duccio created was revolutionary, the first double-sided altarpiece in history. The Maestà reached 5 meters in height and 4 in width. The front side presented the Madonna and Child surrounded by angels and saints. But the true innovation was the reverse side, an encyclopedia of Christian history in 43 scenes. On June 9, 1311, all of Siena poured into the streets. The finished Maestà was carried in solemn procession from the workshop to the cathedral. All shops closed, the bishop led the procession, trumpets and timpani sounded. The entire city accompanied the Madonna to the cathedral. It looked something like this. 200 years, the Maestà remained in place, inspiring generations of Sienese artists. But in 1506, it was considered archaic and moved to a side chapel. In 1777, the unthinkable happened. The altarpiece was sawed in half. Today, the Maestà exists in 33 fragments, scattered across 10 museums in 5 countries. The front side of the Maestà was a revolution in depicting the sacred. 30 figures of angels and saints don't just stand, they communicate through glances and gestures. A living heavenly court of the beautiful Madonna instead of frozen Byzantine frontality. Siena's patron saints kneel with individual, recognizable faces, not faceless masks of holiness, living people. The Maestà forever destroyed Byzantine schematism and opened the path to Renaissance realism. Here, for the first time, monumentality and intimacy, sacred and human, were united. This work became a school for all subsequent generations of Sienese masters and proved art could be simultaneously deeply religious and deeply human. This is Duccio's true genius. He showed that beauty will save the world if it speaks to every person's heart. The reverse side of the Maestà is history's first attempt to create connected narrative in painting, a true film of 43 episodes. Duccio invented the language of visual storytelling. Each panel is a frame of the great story, but a frame that works both independently and in connection with others. In passion scenes, Duccio showed a wide range of human emotions. Disciples' faces in the betrayal express anger, fear, confusion. Each character experiences drama in their own way. These aren't symbolic figures, but living people with individual characters. Duccio's genius is that he managed to transfer biblical events into recognizable contemporaneity. Cities in Temptation on the Mountain are Sienese landscapes. Ceramics in Wedding at Cana is local Sienese majolica. Architecture everywhere reflects 14th century Tuscan forms. Thus, sacred history became close and understandable. It's amazing how a work created more than 7 centuries ago can still move and inspire, even while divided into fragments around the world. This is the true greatness of Duccio's art.
Now a series of panels from the back predella of the famous Maestà altarpiece by Duccio di Buoninsegna, the first altarpiece to have both front and back sides. The predella is the lower part of the altarpiece, extended horizontally like its pedestal. For the first time in 250 years, these panels could be seen together. They're kept in different museums in the US, Europe, and Siena. This was a unique opportunity. That's why I decided to tell you about them now, despite already having a lot of material about Duccio in this video. The back predella of the Maestà depicted Christ's temptations and miracles. Of 9 scenes, 8 survive. 1, probably the baptism of Christ, is lost. Temptation in the Temple. This scene depicts Christ's second temptation, described in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. The devil placed him on the temple's pinnacle. "Throw yourself down, angels will catch you." Christ replied, "God should not be tempted." Victory over the temptation of pride and show-off religiosity. Refusal to demonstrate power emphasizes humility and true mission. This work demonstrates Duccio's ability to transform traditional religious subjects into psychologically rich dramatic scenes that remain relevant today. The temple in Duccio's work isn't just background, but an active participant in the narrative. The building echoes the baptisteries of Florence and Pisa, looks real. The interior recalls Siena Cathedral. The tiled floor and columns are rendered in perspective. Duccio perfectly understood linear perspective decades before its theoretical foundation in the Renaissance.
Temptation on the Mountain. The devil promises Christ all world kingdoms for worship. Cities in the foreground. Siena's festive colors, towers, domes, crenellated walls. Duccio preserves medieval conventions, figures large, rejected kingdoms small, scale of values, not naturalistic proportions, angels added later, probably by another hand. Calling of Peter and Andrew. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Christ on the rocky shore, a net full of fish hangs before the boat. Fine golden trim on Christ's clothing contrasts with the fishing net's filigree. Notably realistic fish. Probably one of the last panels, demonstrating all lessons from working on the Maestà. The landscape evokes associations with nature, but the golden sky reminds us. The physical world isn't the artist's main priority. Symbolism remains, but in realistic clothing. And this is the wedding at Cana. This is the episode told in John's Gospel. Around the wedding table sit Jesus, Peter, Andrew with halos, and 4 guests, including the groom. The Madonna, on the left, addresses her son. They have no more wine. Duccio creates a real room with wooden ceiling and Gothic arches. Gothic influence is obvious. Brilliant discovery. The artist depicts not the moment of miracle, but the moment of anticipation. Servants fill vessels with water that should turn into wine. This creates an atmosphere of tense expectation among the guests. Attention to detail is mesmerizing. On the table covered with white cloth, glasses with wine remains. In servants' hands, jugs and decanters characteristic of Sienese ceramics. Brick floor, such can still be seen in old Sienese houses. The Byzantine world took on the appearance of Tuscan environment. Duccio knew Giotto's perspective, but consciously departed from it to highlight important details. The set table too tilted relative to the ceiling, but how expressive it is and how well we see everything on the table. And again, cinema, healing of the blind man. Jesus smears the blind man's eyes with clay and his saliva and sends him to wash in the pool of Siloam. The man is depicted twice, first blind before Christ and at the pool where he washes his eyes. This is a cinematic technique. Infrared photography showed Duccio developed the composition, but buildings were possibly drawn by Simone Martini. The power of character individualization is striking. Notice the apostles behind Christ. Each has unique features, but most importantly, they look like ordinary people of that time. The Transfiguration. On a high mountain, Christ was transfigured. His face and clothing shone like the sun. 3 disciples witnessed the conversation with prophets Moses and Elijah. Disciples fall from fear at the sound of God's voice, raise their hands blinded by the sight. Christ's radiance is witnessed by golden clothing folds and pink glow on the ground. This is a rare depiction of transfiguration for Italian painting. The feast wasn't celebrated everywhere in the Western Church of Duccio's time. The raising of Lazarus, culminating proof of Christ's divinity. Lazarus has been dead 4 days. Jesus called him to come out, and he rose in burial shroud, smelling of the grave. Faithfulness to the gospel account in details. Martha said, "Lord, by this time there is a stench." The man in yellow covers his nose. Is this a simple gesture of shock or protection from the stench? Duccio changed the composition from horizontal tomb to vertical cave, closer to biblical text. Lazarus's vertical pose served as a visual stop at the end of the 9-panel predella. Crowded composition, practically without background. The crowd presses to the cave to witness the miracle. Christ alone stands out clearly, a powerful hand gesture as if pulling Lazarus out. So, what did we see? A revolution. Duccio and the Sienese school achieved the impossible. Transformed art from instruction into living cinema, united Byzantine mysticism with human emotions. Created the first Netflix series in painting. Showed that beauty will save the world if it speaks to the heart. Siena asked, why? And got the answer, art is needed to make us more human, more feeling, more alive. 700 years later, these works still move and inspire. This is the true greatness of the Sienese school. They created art that will outlive centuries. What do you think? Which work impressed you most? Write in the comments.